Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and I'm here to ask you, well, not just me, I got Lily back there here to ask, can we really make RGH3 easier? Let's see if we can. For anybody who does not know, this is going to be another Xbox 360 related video. We have one right here. RGH3 has been installed. And for anybody who does not know, RGH3 stands for Reset Glitch Hack 3. This is a modification that you can do on the Xbox 360 that involves some clever glitching in order to get a modified NAND up and running so you can run all your homebrew, unsigned code, emulators, all that fun stuff here on this console. Hopefully it's going to be a little more complete, like that one in the back that I have there. However, we do have this one here that is still not fully put together, but I promise you it does work. Now, Reset Glitch Hack 3 is special because not only it is the most recent major iteration of Reset Glitch Hack, but it also allows us to glitch the console without a glitch chip, which is super awesome to see. Yes, you still need a NAND programmer to read and write and program the NAND. However, when it comes down to this, if you have a fat system, you really just need 2 wires, a diode, and a resistor, or if you have a slim system, you just need 2 wires and a resistor to get this all up and running, the things that are actually installed into the system on the bottom here. Now, I've done a few videos covering RGH3 from start to finish in a tutorial-like fashion, just incredibly verbose, some pretty long tutorials, but I'm pretty confident in what all they cover and how good they are in regards to this. However, there has been something that people have been asking about, and even, I guess, bringing to my attention here. It's been a QSB more specific for the slim systems that can make this a little easier. Or can it? We'll actually take a look at it here, and it's going to be specifically this little guy that we're taking a look at. This here is the 360 Slim PLL QSB from Element 18592, otherwise known as the Mod Shop and a friend of the show here on the Mr. Mario 2011 channel. He's been featured a few times. I've definitely shown his work, and he definitely does some great stuff. So this is even something I kind of half joked with him on a podcast that I had him on, and when we were talking about, you know, these small points on RGH3, I even kind of hinted and said, hey, maybe you should work on a QSB or something like this. And he said that he was working on maybe a little something, and we have it right here. Now, this is not new by any means. This has been around for a bit, but this has been brought up to me several times, asking what my opinions have been on it, asking me to cover it in some way if I've done a install here, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. So I'm going to show you taking one of these stock Xbox 360s, and we're going to be modifying it with RGH 3.0 using the 360 Slim PLL QSB, and we're going to see how much easier it does make an RGH3 install. And I will say this is all thanks to our sponsor for this video here, PCBWay. Now, before people might be rolling their eyes over the thought of a sponsor here, I just want to say, first of all, I don't really take sponsorships all too often on the channel, but when PCBWay approached me, I was really excited for this because I've actually used their services before. Several years ago, I ended up using their services for some PCB printing that was not related to the Xbox 360, but I ended up using their services to get some PCBs printed. I used them. They seemed to work pretty well. So when they reached out to me for a collaboration, I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to take some of these really awesome projects that the community has been releasing and open sourcing to the world here that I've even covered either in videos or on Mod Chat, and I've talked about, or I've just found interesting, but I haven't been able to actually make the time to work on them here. So I thought something like this was a fantastic opportunity, and someone like PCBWay would have been an incredibly fitting sponsor for a little something like this. Now, PCBWay offers a ton of options to get printed circuit boards, 3D prints, flex cables, CNC machining, and so much more done. And maybe you're even someone like me who has little to no experience actually prototyping, and you just see some projects like this and you want to try and get them off the ground and, well, into your hands here, just like this. Well, you know what? It's pretty easy to do. They make it easy to do on their site, and I'm going to show you how you can do that using, well, let's go ahead and use this as an example. For Element's QSB, it's this easy. First, go to his GitHub repository. I'm going to have it linked down below in the description, and go ahead and download everything here. You can quite literally go to code, local, and download the zip somewhere you can easily find it. Once that's been downloaded, you can click the link I have for PCBWay down below in the description to navigate over to PCBWay. Go over to PCB Instant Quote, and from here we're going to click on Quick Order PCB. It's going to ask you to add a Gerber file, which you'll just have to click this, of course, and give it a few moments to churn through that zip file. Check it out. It's already been able to cover a lot of what we need right here. Now for here, regardless of whether you're printing this PCB or another project PCB, you are going to have to make sure you follow the instructions that the Gerbers have included if they came with any. For example, on the GitHub project for this, it does say that the thickness needs to be 0.6 millimeters, so we are going to have to change this to 0.6. Once any instructions are locked in, from here you can work on any further customizations, such as changing the silkscreen color or even changing the solder mask color to whatever you're wanting right here. Now, I will be honest, I was incredibly tempted to try and order this with black solder mask and a black silkscreen, so I could feel like Master Shake in that episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force where he's trying to get business cards printed with black text on a black background as the drizzle.
Black. Everything must be black, like the storm of justice.
Well, maybe you better talk to them then.
However, I did decide to take this here a bit seriously, and I went with the black solder mask with the white silkscreen for the text, so therefore I could say that any 360 that I installed this into is going to be internally emo. Do keep in mind though, if you're trying to go for that emo experience like I am, you are going to have to pay a little bit of a premium for that silkscreen color. I got the PCBs pretty quickly, and seriously, like, I've just been, messing around with it while I've been doing this, but this looks great. I've been incredibly happy with it here, and from what I understand, this is also not an easy PCB to get printed just because of the angle, the curve, everything that it has. This is respectfully a weird PCB, so the fact that they were able to do this right here, hey, I'm super happy about that. It ended up coming out great, and it works as well too. Seriously though, yet again, thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video, especially because I don't think they were expecting me to be bringing up Aqua Teen Hunger Force and emo Xboxes in the midst of this ad read here, but you know what? This is what they pay for, I guess. Either way, if you do want to check out PCBWay yourself for any of your prototyping goods, needs, or services for things such as the slim PLL QSB right here, you can check out PCBWay by clicking my link down below in the description of this video. Now let's go ahead, continue on, get one of these Xboxes ripped apart, and get one of these QSBs installed, and see how much easier this is. Alright, so getting into this here, I end up grabbing a Trinity console that it seems like was a GameStop system at one point, although it hasn't been butchered by GameStop, thankfully. However, it was opened by them. Either way, that's besides the point. I was able to boot it up. It was able to boot up successfully. It seems to work. It is on an older dashboard, so it's a bit outdated, but that's fine. That doesn't matter for what we're doing here. And it also plays games, so the DVD drive is working. Everything seems to be in working order, so that means we can shut it down and rip it apart. Now, I'm mostly going to speed through this process here, but this is just me taking apart the console and getting it down to the bare naked motherboard, and you do have to do that because we will have to get underneath the X-clamp in order to hit that PLL point. So awesome. Once I had it all ripped apart, I also decided off camera to, of course, clean up and remove the old thermal paste off of the heatsink as well as the IHS itself here, so we can have that all clean and ready to go for whenever we do apply new thermal paste. Now we can just flip the motherboard upside down, and this is where our PCB is going to come into play. Now this is going to physically connect to the post and PLL bypass points, which means it's going to be right around here, just underneath the X-clamp and super close to one of the pegs right here. So what I do is, with any normal console install for the 360 at least, I typically just go in, I find the points that I'm going to be soldering to, and I quickly clean them up, apply a little bit of flux on them, and then tin them with some nice fresh solder so they'll be ready to go. Now I've only done 3 of 4 because we're going to have to do a little bit more with the PLL bypass point. That's going to be the scariest one here. But in order to prepare ourselves, let's go ahead and prepare this QSB. Now I do have this here up close and personal with my microscope, and I am using a 0805 size resistor. We're going to go according to the specification, which is actually written and printed right on the back of this QSB. It says for a Trinity, use a 3K ohm resistor, and for a Corona, use a 1K ohm resistor. Now for Trinities, you are able to go between a range of 3K to 10K, but I'm going to obey the instructions here just for this, and we're going to go with a 3K resistor. So I end up grabbing a 0805 sized 3K ohm resistor. You might be asking, why did I go with the 0805 as opposed to the 0603? Well, simple. That just denotes the size, and the 0805 is going to be bigger, so it should be a little bit easier to apply on the board, but either size is going to be fine as long as you can get it soldered on there. I am going to be honest as well too in saying that I am not the best when it comes to soldering these little SMD resistors, or even if you do like LED work. I've done LED replacements on controllers and RF boards and such before, but these are just so small that I'm not the biggest fan of them, so I just don't have a ton of practice with them, and it's been a while since I've done one, so bear with me here. What I did was I fluxed up both of these R1 pads and I applied a little bit of solder onto them here. I just used some no clean on this, and this here is optional. You don't even really have to tin these pads before you put the resistor on. I just chose to do that, but as long as you get it on there, it's fine. Now after a little bit of struggling, I was able to tack this on, and once you tack on one side, it's perfectly fine. So as you can see here, I was able to tack on one side of the resistor, and then I tacked on the other side, and then I revisited the first side. If anyone's wondering what order this is supposed to go in, it doesn't matter thankfully when it comes to a resistor, so you can put it either side here. Thankfully this isn't a diode, so the direction that you install it in does not matter, as long as each end of the resistor is soldered to each pad. Now I'd say overall the hardest part of this install will be exposing that PLL point. However, at least for this part, the QSB itself, this has been the most difficult part. Once you get past this, the rest of this you should be able to manage. Now you're going to have to navigate over to this area over at the console, and you're going to have to take something such as an X-Acto knife or even the sharp end of a pair of tweezers, and you're going to have to gently scrape away the silk screen right here in particular in order to expose the via that we're going to need to solder to. Now, what I'm doing on here, this is actually something I haven't shown before, and I haven't tried this until now, but I do want to thank many people who have commented this on my RGH3 videos. I'm just taking a little piece of Kapton tape, and I'm covering this trace here, which is right below this via. This Kapton tape is strictly optional, however, it is beneficial because I have stressed before, you do not want to cut this trace right here. If you cut this trace, you can brick your system. So many people have recommended covering it with some Kapton tape, and what do you know, it works out beautifully. So if you're doing an RGH3 install yourself and you're feeling a little bit uneasy about that, just take a little bit of Kapton tape and cover that trace right below the via. This is easily the most grating part of the install, but what I can recommend is just take your time, be calm with it, just spend several minutes with it here. You're not in a rush, you're not trying to get this done as fast as possible. Even if it takes 10 minutes for you to do this, it's going to take 10 minutes, that's fine. We want to do this right the first time. What I did here was I made sure this area was quite clean with some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip. Then I came in with an X-Acto knife, and I just ran it across this via several times. Now, this took me a few minutes to do, and there is barely any pressure that I'm applying here, just barely any pressure. You are going to want to scrape this away, but you're barely going to apply any pressure to this. If the area gets a little bit too dirty, just come in with some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip, clean it up, and then continue. And this is essentially what I like to do. I like to make sure the via is nice and exposed and super shiny under my microscope. You are going to see here that the rest of the silk screen is kind of scratched up. That's fine, that's just cosmetic. You're also going to see that there's going to be scratches on the via. Again, that's cosmetic. What's going to be important is that we have very good exposure with it. It is clean, and that it is also quite shiny because, again, that's going to go with the exposure. Either way, this here took me probably 3 minutes or so to do, and at this point I felt pretty confident with my work. It would be best, you want to make sure as much of this is exposed as possible, and you're going to want to have it be nice and shiny. It should look a little something like what you're seeing here. Next up, I also prepared this point just like all the other ones. I took myself a Q-tip with some flux, dabbed it right here, and then I prepared this point with a little bit of solder to tin it. When you tin this point here, you're going to want to be generous, and the reason why I say that is because there's barely any solder that needs to go here, so even if you're being generous, I mean, it's really just going to help you, and only a little bit of solder is going to get onto this point. But here we go, this is looking perfect for what we need to do. Now with the slim PLL QSB itself, we can go ahead and put it in place. You are going to notice that there's going to be 3 points on the motherboard that we're going to have to solder it to, even though we only require 2 of them. The first one is going to be post, the second one is going to be PLL, but there's also going to be another component that we're soldering to here. Don't worry, we're just using this component as an anchor. We're not going to have to do anything electrical with this point. You are going to want to make sure you anchor it well, mind you, but electronically, there's nothing that's going on here. You're going to want to hit that point first because you really don't want to anchor this entire thing for the first point on the PLL point because that is just such a small and brittle via that we're working with. With the QSB safely locked in place and all ready to rock, I came over to the PLL point to get that out of the way. Thankfully, this is pretty simple to do. You just come in with your soldering iron, introduce a fresh blob of solder. It would be recommended to have flux there, of course, and you're done. The PLL point is locked in and all ready to go, so we can now come up to the post point. It is worth noting that if you're doing this on a Corona motherboard, that several of the Corona motherboard revisions do not have the post point enabled on here. So this is going to be optional. In my opinion, you might as well just still solder to this point even if you're using a Corona, just so you have an extra point to lock this QSB into place, so really for the protection of the PLL point. However, you're obviously not going to wire up anything to post if post is disabled on your revision of the Corona. But you can come over here and just do the exact same thing. Introduce some fresh solder with your soldering iron, put a little bit of a glob on there, and you're done. So all of the actual board work for the QSB is now completed. That's all there is to it. Awesome to see. For our next 2 points, this is where you're going to need wires, but thankfully you're not going to have to worry about any resistors because we have the resistor already integrated onto the QSB itself. Now you're going to find the corresponding point for SMC post, and here on my trendy, I was looking for the point just above R3R22. If you plan to use the post pad on this QSB on a Corona, it will be a different point. I will have that on screen here though, so you can check that out. Next up, we're going to need our most important wire, which is going to be going from PLL bypass to SMC PLL. You're just going to take a much longer wire if you're doing a Trinity motherboard, and you're going to tack it into the PLL pad on the QSB. Next, you're going to find the FT2V1 pad close to the front of the motherboard and solder the other end of that wire to it. Again, do keep in mind if you're doing this on a Corona motherboard, it is going to be a different point and it's going to be a much smaller wire that you'll need. You're going to need it right here. I'll go ahead and show it on screen, and it's going to be the DB3R4 pad that you're going to be soldering to. Fantastic. Now once all of that is done, we're really good to go. All of our RGH3 wiring is complete. completed and, in my opinion here, made easier thanks to the QSB. So we can now just clean up our work. What I do is I just take some 99% isopropyl alcohol, some Q-tips, and I just go in and clean up everything really well. Clean up all your points and clean up as much of that old flux as you can. From here, you can come up to the top of the motherboard, and depending on your motherboard as well as your flasher, you're going to want to solder this in. For this here, I'm going to be using my Pico flasher setup, and I'm just wiring it in directly, as you can see. I'm not going to go over this here in too much detail, but if you need to know what points to solder onto your motherboard, again, you can refer to the tutorials that I've covered for Trendy and Corona consoles. Once this is all soldered in, we do not want to turn on the console yet, but we can now take it over to our computer where we can program the NAND. Make sure you can at least plug it into power, mind you, but do not turn it on. At this point, if you have a Trendy and you turn it on, it's going to flash with red lights, and that is to be expected on Trinities. At this point, I have the console plugged into power, Ethernet, and HDMI, but I am not turning it on just yet because it has the wiring in place, but it hasn't been modified yet. This is where we are going to need to hook up our programmer to our PC, but we're also going to need to, of course, program the NAND here. For this, I am going to go over to Octal's site, and I'm going to grab the latest build of JRunner with extras. With it downloaded and extracted, I'll go ahead and open up JRunner. It is picking up the Pico flasher, which is fantastic, so let's go ahead and give this 2 NAND reads. And perfect, it was able to pick it all up just fine, so that means we wired up everything successfully. Looks like it had to do a bit of work with some bad blocks, but aside from that, we should be all good to go. So from here, I'm just going to select the latest kernel version, glitch 2, make sure this is RGH3, it automatically selects 27 megahertz, and then I will create Zell, and then write Zell back to the system. At this point, I'm now going to physically disconnect the Pico flasher from my computer, and let's go ahead and try to turn on the system for the first time. And would you look at that? That's awesome. It took 2 seconds to boot up with green lights successfully. That's great. So from here, we have the information we need from our console. So I'm going to plug this into JRunner. I've plugged in the IP address, so I'm going to click on Get CPU Key, and let's see what happens. And there we go. Would you take a look at that? We got everything here. So we got our CPU key. We were able to decrypt our NAND. We have our KV info. We are all good to go at this point. Off camera here, I'm going to turn off the console, and I'm going to plug the Pico flasher back in once it turns off. So here we go with everything set up. Again, we're still going to do a glitch 2 image with RGH3 on the latest kernel. We can now click on Create XE Build and let it do its magic. And now for our final step, we click on Write NAND. And we should now have a modified system here within a few seconds. Amazing. There we go. I'm going to disconnect the Pico flasher one last time. And let's go ahead and go back over to our system. So we have good news here. If I hit the eject button, it does still boot up with green lights, and it brings us to Zell Reloaded. This time around, I just press the standard power button on the system itself, but it boots up normally. It looks like it's not going to be modified at all here, but it is booting into a modified NAND. So we are able to launch Homebrew and all that fun stuff, and it works successfully. So far, I've booted it up several times, and it boots up in less than 5 seconds every single time. Now, with our RGH3 installation completed, how much easier does the quick solder board here make RGH3? Well, I will say this. First of all, if you have not done RGH3 before and you're kind of lacking in soldering skills, or you're a little bit nervous about this, or really you're just not proficient enough with soldering, but you're kind of wanting to tackle this as a first project, I do tell many people you might not want to do RGH3 for your first project. The reason why I say that is because a lot of people get excited seeing that it's only 2 wires, but they don't really realize how small that PLL point is. So with that, I will say if you are newer to soldering in that regard, it's not going to make this immensely easier. It's still going to be difficult for 2 reasons. One, because you're going to be soldering a SMD resistor onto the QSB itself. And secondly, you're still going to have to tackle that PLL point, scraping it and getting everything soldered up to it. However, if you are someone who is more proficient at soldering, maybe you're a bit more of a hobbyist, you've done some component level repair, or even you've done RGH3 before, but you've just done it with direct wires and you're wondering how much easier this might make it. In my opinion, it did make it a decent amount easier. Now, keep in mind, if RGH3 on a difficulty level is like at a 10, it's not going to bring this all the way down to a 4. No, it's not going to do that. But the big things that I noticed are, 1, when you end up soldering the PLL point, when you end up locking it in, I felt like it was much easier using the quick solder board for that as opposed to a piece of wire, kind of like messing around with it and getting it all lined up there, even if you tack in, like, even if you tin the wire with solder beforehand. I just felt like using the quick solder board for the PLL point, once you have it locked in, was easier. On top of that, I also did feel like it was more secure because you have the power of a board behind it as opposed to just one small wire that can be pulled off. Finally, when you're also wiring it up to the other points on the motherboard itself, I also felt like that was made easier because as opposed to soldering from one brittle point to another, because again, that PLL point is quite sensitive. So if you put a little bit too much pressure or you tug a little too hard at it, you can ruin that right there. You can ruin the via on the motherboard itself. But if you're soldering a wire from one of those breakout pads on the quick solder board itself, it is a much bigger pad and you have the power of a quick solder board, like an actual board itself, pulling that and, you know, holding it all in. So in that regard, it did seem to feel more secure for me. So overall, if it's something that you're interested in and you want to just make your installs not only look a little bit cleaner, but just be a little bit easier when you're soldering everything in, it's definitely worth giving some of these a shot here and see how you feel about it. I will say though, the only thing that was harder in my opinion was, again, I think this is just practice for me, but I'm not the best when it comes to surface mount like components like that, when you're just taking a resistor, like an SMD resistor, and you're plopping it on there and you have to solder it in. It's really tiny. You're messing with the soldering iron, you're messing with tweezers and such. So I think that's my own proficiency right there that I just need to work on, but that was difficult for me. But if you've done installs such as replacing LEDs in a controller or LEDs on a RF board, if you've done installations like that, then you can do something like this. It just depends on how much you like them. And me personally, the LED mods do look cool, but I've never been a huge fan of the installation process just because everything is so small right there. Either way, that is about it for this video here. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all did enjoy it. Now, I do have some thank yous and shout outs I want to give at the end of this video as well. First of all, shout out, of course, to Element or the mod shop for his work on the QSB and open sourcing it. It is much appreciated, and I just love open source community projects like this. Just super awesome to see overall. Another one goes out to Josh over from Octal's Console Shop for maintaining and keeping up with JRunner with extras, Balika for Pico Flasher, the folks who've worked on RGH3, so that'd be 15432, Octal, as well as Dr. Shotsky, and finally, I'm going to thank the video sponsor here yet again, PCBWay, for sponsoring this video. They did make this possible here, thankfully, and gave me a reason to check out this project, so very awesome to see. Anyways, that is about it for this video here. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, a like would be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. As I always say though, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. Lily was just asleep the whole time, yo.